The Netherlands proclaimed itself to be neutral in World War I, and afterwards to maintain its independence policy. Military spending was a low priority for this tiny country, relying on allies in case of major conflict. In 1939, when the Nazi regime led by Adolf Hitler invaded Poland and declared war on the British Empire and France, Hitler guaranteed neutrality with the Netherlands by signing an agreement. Hitler's promises and agreements were stall tactics that enabled the German army to build strength and prepare for war. On the morning of May 10, 1940, without a declaration of war, Hitler's army invaded the Netherlands by way of Belgium and Luxembourg. Hitler had his eye on the strategically placed Dutch airfields on the northern Holland coast. These would be particularly useful to the Luftwaffe, launching an air attack of the United Kingdom. The Dutch army was caught unprepared by the invasion. Much of the Dutch weaponry was left over from the First World War over 20 years before. Dutch resistance was courageous, but the strength of the Nazi war machine was overwhelming. During the Rotterdam Blitz, relentless bombing destroyed 25,000 homes and killed more than 800 citizens. In only 4 days, the Netherlands was under Nazi control. 9-year-old Harry Andringa lived north of Amsterdam in the village of Artswoud when the Nazis invaded the Netherlands. Harry lived there with his mother, father, and 5 siblings. Harry, now in his 80s, recalls his memory of the war.
That there wasn't too many explanations given. It was around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning when I heard rumbling that woke me up and lightning, and I said, oh, there's a thunderstorm coming. And my father was up too, and he told me that, no, this isn't thunder and lightning. This is a war is starting. And I never heard that word before, of course, war. What's war? And all he told me was, my father, was that you will find out, you will learn. And boy, did I ever, yeah. So that's all the explanation I was given.
Officially, the Netherlands surrendered 1 day after the bombing of Rotterdam on May 15, 1940. Thousands of civilians and military lives were lost. Dutch citizens gathered to read the proclamation of the Nazi conquerors.
From May the 10th to May the 15th, it was only 5 days because they were like a steamroller coming in to a small little country. So it didn't take long. And then, yeah, I don't know, they all of a sudden they were everywhere.
Within days, Harry's life began to change. The school across the road from Harry's home was taken over by the Germans.
It was a 3-room school. They ate in one and they slept in the other one. And the third one in the back, they used that for a horse stable. They had horses and they put the horses in. Yeah, so we had no school. So in the summer months, when the weather was nice, that farm beside the church, they had big trees there and we could sit, the desks were put in the field there underneath and in the shade. We had our schools there. If the weather was bad, we could go to the church. We all had our specific times to go to this church to hand in our homework and get the new homework to do it at home, because there's no school. The teachers had to teach us the German language. And soldiers would used to come into class and started talking to us kids in German, and then we had to answer them in German, so they could check up on the teachers whether they were doing doing what they were told to do by how we could communicate in German.
Besides German soldiers, Harry saw his first prisoners of war, who were often used as slaves by the Nazis.
Prisoners of war. They had prisoners of war, and we were told, because they looked different, we were told that they were Mongolians. How the Germans got hold of Mongolian prisoners of war, that's a long way from Holland. But they had them, and they used them as hunting dogs. These poor people, they were at a hunting trip. They were hunting rabbits, and they had these poor people stirring up in the field, in the wheat fields, stirring up the rabbits, and then to come this way. And they were sitting along the dike side, and they were sitting there waiting, and the rabbits were coming towards them, and they were, you shoot them, eh? They weren't. It was in the fall. It was cold and shivery and wet. And these poor people, they weren't dressed for it. They were wearing rags. Some of them didn't have no shoes or anything on their feet. They had their feet wrapped in burlap bags, and they were wet and sopping wet. They were terrible. And they come up and they had lunchtime. And these German soldiers, they were sitting in their truck and in their cars, and they had a thermos with nice hot coffee in it, and they had cheese and sandwiches, and they're sitting there having a great old time having lunch. Well, these poor people didn't get nothing. And then I remember one of them found a beet, the cattle feed, beetroot, lying in a ditch with water, and it had been frozen. So that beetroot, the beet that he picked up out of the water on the side of the road, it looked like it was glazed. You could, and they were eating of that, and they shared it among one another. I would get a couple of bites of that one beet just to get something in the stomach. And when the war was over, I often heard them say, when they were rounded up, that I didn't want to do this, but orders are orders. That is something I will never understand, how one human being can do something like that to another human being.
The Germans drafted civilians from conquered countries for forced labor in factories. This included every man between the age of 18 and 45 in the Netherlands. Those who refused to work for the Germans were forced into hiding. Getting caught would mean being sent to a concentration camp or death. Hitler, in his quest for the final solution, ordered the rounding up of Jews. The meticulous record-keeping of the Dutch worked against them, making it easy to check ancestry and addresses, allowing the deportation of the Jews to be systematic. All Jews were ordered to wear Star of David badges on their clothing. Many died of disease and starvation, or were sent to extermination camps, such as Auschwitz. Of the 140,000 Jews who lived in the Netherlands before 1940, only 30,000 survived. Harry's Uncle Cor was instrumental in the hiding of Jews.
My Uncle Cor, who looked after the Jews in the province of North Holland, the northern part, he knew where to hide the Jews and knew where they were to safeguard them. And he lived in Haarlem, and on his bike he pedaled around mostly at night moving Jews around at night in the dark. And that's how we got Sonia and Esther living with us too.
Sonia was the young daughter of Esther. Harry's family decided early to provide a safe place to hide Sonia, although there were close calls.
The German soldiers didn't knock on the door or anything. They just walk in and out of your house. You had no privacy during that time. They just walked in. And there was one time that we were standing in the kitchen and I was facing my mother, and my mother went, "Oh!" And I said, and she started to tremble, and I said, "What's the matter?" And she pointed, "Ah!" And I turned around, and there's a German soldier standing behind me there. And just a couple of weeks before that, the mayor, his house was surrounded, and Jews were found in there and taken away in a truck, never to be heard or seen of again. And so that we thought that was it, because little Sonia was with us then, and she was what, about 2.5, 3 years old. She was fully aware of what was going on with the German soldier there. So he asked my mother, "Whose kids are those?" And my mother says, "Well, they're my kids." And he pointed right at the little Jewish girl, and he said, "What about her?" And my mother says, "Well, that's my, she's visiting today. That's the daughter of my sister. She'll be gone again tomorrow. He's just spending the day here." And he just burst out laughing and said, like we insulted his intelligence, sort of, and didn't go over too big, because he could pick her right out. It was a Jewish girl. And so he said, "Yeah, right, your sister's daughter," she says. And he started to laugh. He turned around and walked out of the house. So we figured that's it. We were waiting for the truck to come and pick us all up, never to be heard or seen of again. But it didn't happen. And this was around 10 in the morning, and in the afternoon, it still hadn't happened. And so I says to my mother, "I think we're in the clear. They're not coming for us." And I wonder why. And my mother figured that maybe that German soldier has a little daughter like that living, is still in Germany at home. So, and that's the only explanation we can think of, because we thought our end had come. It was the end of the line, but we survived that. So
Sonia's mother, Esther, worked as a hairdresser in a village about 10 kilometers away. Uncle Cor arranged for Esther to secretly visit Sonia.
He used to come down on the weekend, and he used to pick her up at night and drive her, make sure that she got to our house to visit her daughter for the weekend. He used to bicycle, and he used to go ahead in the dark, and she would follow at a bit of a distance. The thing was that he had a light on the bike, but you weren't supposed to shine it, so there was just a little slit in your light that is, it wasn't any good. But the tail light, the red tail light, when you bicycle, when you move, the tail light is on, the red tail light. So if there was a spot check, the Germans had checks here and there, and you had to have your papers ready and this, that, to stop you. And anyway, if there was a German checkpoint, he would stop then, of course, to get checked. Then if he didn't move, the red light came off, didn't light up. And so she was quite a distance away. She would wait. Now, if he had to move, he got checked and he had to move. He just put the dynamo, moved it off the wheel, of the front wheel, so that when he bicycled, the red taillight wouldn't come on. Then she knew, and she turned around and go back.
Hiding Jews caused relentless stress and hardship, not only for the Jews, but also for the Dutch families. For Harry's Uncle Cor, the risk was unbearable. He confided to Harry's family an unspeakable crime.
I'll never forget the time that he used to come to our house for an overnight, for a sleep and bite to eat and all this, that and the other. And just a family visit. And I still remember him sitting there in his chair with his head down, and he told us, "I just killed my wife." And he said, "I had to, because she couldn't take it. She snapped like an elastic, you know, that you pull too tight and it snaps." He said, because she knew what he was doing, and that it was dangerous work. And when he left the house, he nor her would never know if he would come back again. He might, in one of his missions, he might be taken prisoner and sent to one of the death camps, and never be heard of again. But she couldn't take that anymore. She just started yelling and screaming at the top of her voice about, and this, that, and the other. So he says, "I had to kill her, because if I had left and people would hear, and the Germans would hear," he says, "well, you can well imagine," he says, "that all the Jews that are under my jurisdiction, hidden, and the people that hide them, they would all be rounded up." She would, blow the whole cover. So he said he had to kill her, and that was the saddest thing ever heard.
The Jews that were not fortunate enough to be hidden by families like Harry's were rounded up and sent to transit camps, a holding place until enough Jews were assembled to fill a train to the extermination camp.
They had these holding camps. I think Amersfoort had one, and a place called Vught in Brabant, in the southern part of the Netherlands. They kept them there until they had a train load, and then they went into the extermination camps.
It took a full 4 years after the German invasion of the Netherlands for the Allies to be strong enough to land in Normandy, France, on June 6, 1944. Canadian soldiers landed on Juno Beach. The Allies advanced rapidly towards the Dutch border. A risky plan called Operation Market Garden, meant to end the war quickly, ultimately failed. Nonetheless, substantial regions in the southern Netherlands were liberated. Northern Netherlands would need to wait another 11 months. The winter of 1944-45 was unusually harsh and became known as the Hunger Winter or Dutch Famine. The Germans cut off all food and fuel shipments to the western provinces, where 4.5 million Dutch lived. People from the city ventured into the country looking for food. Severe malnutrition and starvation led to the death of 18,000 Dutch.
People from the cities used to come with their hand carts, and it was winter, and it was a terrible winter, snow and all that, and they got stuck in the snow. Sometimes we had people sleeping all over the floor because they couldn't move anywhere, and we shared their food with us. The little bit we had, we shared with them. Yeah, well, we had our own gardens too, eh? But with people from the city coming in, we make a pot of soup, and you share it with the people. And then they go on further again, because when nightfall came in the winter, they're looking for a place to sleep and a bite to eat. But hunger is an awful thing. It's painful.
The children and elderly suffered the most.
It's a tradition in Holland that for a funeral, the church bell would ring. And the Hunger Winter, they didn't allow the church bell to ring for a funeral anymore, because it would be going all day. There was so many people dying of starvation. So they cut that out, no more bells ringing.
People from the city ventured into the country searching for food to take back to their families. entry into Amsterdam or Haarlem was by ferry. The Germans stopped people at the checkpoints, confiscating food.
Because you had to go by a boat, a ferry boat, to get into Amsterdam and Haarlem and that. And they used to stop there. After all that walking and all the suffering, they had a little bit of food for the family at home if they were still alive. And that was taken away at the ferry boat. There was this teenage boy, and he had pushed a handcart onto the ferry and had a tarp over the handcart. And German soldier says, "What's underneath there, underneath the tarp?" He said, "Oh, my father, he couldn't walk anymore. He was so tired, so I told him to go lie down and under the tarp." He said, "And I'll push him home the rest of the way." So they lifted the tarp, and his father was there all right, but he had already, rigor mortis had already set in. He had died. After searching for food, he brought his dead father home. Oh, there are some horror stories going there, really.
Food was scarce, and things that were once considered inedible were now eaten to stay alive.
It was finished. There was no food. Nothing at all. We would, tulip bulbs too. There is something in a tulip bulb that's poisonous. I don't know which part of it is, but it had to be taken out before them food. Nettles. We ate nettles, like a kind of a spinach, but we were told that if you eat nettles, you get strong because there's a lot of iron in that sort of stuff. If you eat dog meat, not that canned food. No, you ate dogs. Actually, dogs and cats. We never killed it. You wouldn't let your cat out at night on its own, because somebody will grab it and have it for supper. To survive during the hunger winter, we had to pretty well steal everything. There just wasn't any food anymore. It was gone. There was no fuel either. Hydro was cut. There's no hydro. To keep the place warm, tried to anyway. The wood trim, the baseboards and the door trim and all that is wood, right? We used to rip that all off in the house and chop it up, use that for kindling. To heat the house, we had to cut down trees and steal them, bring them home, that nobody knew we had them, and yet somebody reported to the police that we had stolen a tree. So the police officer came down. He says, but it has been reported that you stole a tree. And we had a lean-to at the back of the house with a flat roof on it. And that's where the tree went. And he says, seeing I'm a very busy man, he says, I don't have time right now. He says, but tomorrow afternoon sometime, I'll stop by and investigate the theft of this tree. He said, and when I come and do that, he said, I don't want to see what I'm seeing right now. And he looked up at the flat roof and he was seeing the tree up there. So that tree was disappeared. But the next day, when he came around, so that's how we survived. We helped one another.
The village was essentially shut off from the outside world. One of the best ways to learn about the war was listening to a shortwave radio. However, it was forbidden by the Germans. Violators were sent to concentration camps.
We weren't allowed to have a radio, a shortwave radio, because some people had it and they picked up the news from the BBC in England, from London. And if you were caught, you were gone. Because the Germans controlled the radio stations in Holland. There was Hilversum 1 and Hilversum 2. One was religious and the other one wasn't. It was funny though, because they were losing the war. and their version of it was on the radio was that we pulled back according to plan. That's when it was a big joke, really, you know, according to plan. You were wiped out.
Humanitarian aid by the Allies started in the final days of the war in the form of massive food airdrops to the starving Dutch. The Allied Operation Manna and the American Operation Chowhound dropped food between April 29th and May 8th, 1945.
In the end of the war, we got food airdropped. They weren't allowed to bring it in, and then plane wasn't allowed to land or anything to get rid of the food. We had soup kitchens at the time. The soup was just something to fill your stomach, because there was no food value in it at all. It was just like bloody dishwater. But you went and got it, because that's all you could get. When the Canadians came, eventually, they shared their army rations with us. They had cans of, there's a whole meal in a can, like stew, hot dogs in cans, little wieners in cans. And they had these things there. I think you can still get them here, but we didn't know what it was. But they said that they're like about biscuits, and you could eat them. And because the instructions on the packaging we couldn't read because it's all in English, and we didn't speak English. So we got these biscuits and we started eating the biscuits. And then word got out, hey, you can't do that, because you're supposed to put it in a bowl and put water or milk on it, if you had milk. And then it would expand and become a whole meal, one little biscuit. And there's people there because your stomach has shrunk over time. Didn't take as much food anymore. Your stomach was smaller, yet you ate that biscuit and then you got thirsty and started drinking. People had died of a ruptured stomach because we were so hungry and we didn't know how to eat that stuff. Every little kid had his own soldier, his own Canadian soldier. The Canadian soldier would carry him on his arm or hold by the hand and walk down the street with him. Canadians never change. They love their kids, and we love them back, of course. So.
After the liberation of Holland started, the Allies kept advancing towards Germany to end the war. Harry recalls the Allied missions flying on bombing raids of Germany.
They used to, from England, fly over Holland to bomb Germany. They used to come over in the morning, say around 9 o'clock, a constant drone of planes. And they used to come back around 2 in the afternoon. I have this thing that I've seen them flying in formations of 36 planes. There is 3 groups of 12, and they would fly over, and as far as the eye could see, there were planes coming. There must have been not just hundreds, there must have been thousands of planes flying over. And near the end, they run them at night too. We were not allowed to have lights on at night because they could, from the air, they could see where they were, you know, orient themselves. We're over here, we're over there. So there was total darkness. We had black paper that we had to hang in front of the windows. Anyway, we didn't have no more electricity anymore anyway. They took it out, but you had these little candles.
Harry's new little sister Sonia eventually had a stepfather named Sam. Sam and his first family were one of the many Jewish families rounded up by the Germans and sent to Auschwitz. the infamous death camp in Poland.
Sam was there with his wife and kids, and Sam's job at the camp was to when they put them into the gas chambers to be gassed, then when they were all gone, and then they opened the doors and the bodies had to be moved from their gas chamber to the incinerators. That was Sam's job. He'd take the bodies out on carts and wheel them down to the incinerator and to be burned. And Sam says that when they took his wife and his children into the gas chamber, they forced him to look at it when they drove his wife and kids into the gas chamber to be gassed. And he said, when I put my head down, the rifle butted me. Look, he had to look. He had to witness it. As I said, they tied me to a post, and they made sure that I seen them go in there, and then he had the honor of to take the bodies out, his wife and his kids and all that, to put them on carts and bring them to the incinerator. There again, the incinerators, when the bodies were burned, the smoke, he was told that when the smoke came out of the chimney, he was told to wave at the smoke, because some of that smoke are your wife and kids. Can you imagine?
Auschwitz was liberated in January 1945 by the Russians before the war officially ended in May. After liberation, Sam, alone, was determined to return home.
And Sam walked. Auschwitz is in Poland. Sam walked from there all the way to Amsterdam from January, and it wasn't until the fall, September, October or something, that he finally arrived in Amsterdam. He said he walked at night and slept and hid during the day until May, because the Germans were still at war in January yet, not until May. So he had to hide because there was a Jew running back home. And that's how he met up with Sonia and Auntie Esther. There aren't many left anymore, but the veterans that liberated Holland, they go every 5 years and have a parade in Apeldoorn. And in Flinton, where I live now and retired, there is one veteran that landed on the 6th of June in Normandy on the beach, and he's still with us today. He's 93 years old now. And he told me that when he goes there, he said, they treat you like royalty over there. And I says, that's the least we can do, because you guys have done more for us than royalty would ever be able to do. Yeah, because we appreciate, and there is a very strong bond between Holland and Canada, and rightfully so. Ottawa still gets, 70 years later, still every year gets a load of tulip bulbs to put in the parks to remind the Canadians what they've done for us. Before I get all choked up, I better change the subject. Yeah. My life before I came here, being liberated by Canadians after 5 years of Nazi brutality, coming here, being very fortunate with my work to be able to do the things I enjoy doing, having a family, having friends and neighbors, because when I retired from Toronto, I asked some of my friends there, come and visit me, because I don't know anybody where I'm living, where I'm moving to. And they told me, all of them told me, you won't be long by yourself. You'll make friends like lickety-split, sort of. So, and they were right, yeah. I live in a beautiful town, nice, peaceful and quiet. And I enjoy life thoroughly with what I've got so far. And I thank Canada for that. My life then, my life now. Yeah, I'm very grateful for what I've got. I'm glad I came here.